Awesome opening. And for those that arrived late, you just missed something really great, so sorry about that. Hey, look, I think it's really good. True value comes from the connections. And that's either a connection you'll make with one of the speakers when they say something, you think, that makes sense, that all comes together, or with the connections that you make with each other over the next couple of days. What I really like, though, is individually powerful, but limitless together. Boy, doesn't that sound like the New Zealand payments ecosystem? I reckon it does. So let's make that happen. Welcome to The Point 2018. Now this is my third gig at The Point, which sounds really old. I probably should have a Zimmer frame or something with that line, but boy, things have changed over the last 6 years. And certainly one thing that hasn't changed is the pace of that change. It's just keeping, and it's becoming relentless, I tell you. What a turnout we have here today. We have got over 330 delegates, which is great. We've got 45 speakers, half of which are from offshore, or some of those are actually onshore with a foreign accent, but you won't know whether they're offshore or not, so that's okay. We've got 120 organisations and from 5 continents. So what a fantastic display today, and thank you so much for your investment in the next 2 days and being with us here at The Point 2018. What I wanted to do is obviously thank the sponsors, and particularly Datacom, our principal sponsor, and all of the other fine lineup of sponsors that we have, and you'll see plenty of their names and logos throughout the course of the next 2 days. We also had our Link event last night, which was thanks to the support of Xero. We had about 60 plus there, which is great. And just to keep the ratio going of women to male in this industry, we've probably got over 30% of women in the audience today, as opposed to 25% last time. So that is shifting. It's starting to shift. So this is good. Hey, good things take time, but we just need to focus on it and we'll make that happen. What else is happening? I just want to cover off a few things. Firstly, what are the things that are shaping the future of payments? What are we doing about that? And then sort of put a bit of a challenge out in terms of what are you doing about that as well, and then how all of those connect as well. We recently updated our environmental scan, so went out and had a look at what are those key factors that are shaping the future of payments. And what was good is that the drivers remain pretty much on par with what they were in 2017. And I'll talk a bit more about those in a bit more detail. The thing is to remember about these is none of them have got weaker, but a lot of them have got stronger and they've got a real attitude coming at us, and that's particularly things like APIs and others. So things have changed and things have got a bit more drastic, and we just need to make sure we know where the enemy is coming from in this point in time. Let's talk about our always-on society, this relentless habit of constantly looking at the small screen, always looking for feedback and input. The rise of things like artificial intelligence, which means that the value propositions are getting better for consumers and are way more personalised as well. But that's the fact that we're always on, and I'm pretty sure that who's fallen into a ditch or fallen over on the footpath looking at the screen? It happens all the time. In fact, there was one, some city councils have had to fill in sort of lovely water features because people keep having accidents, which is incredible. But that always-on society is not going to go away, and that isn't just domestically, that's globally as well. So there's an expectation of both Kiwis and visitors that for payments, they want to pay who they want, when they want, and how they want, whether that's cross-currency or domestically as well. And I think that's really important for us to consider, and particularly when frictionless and that invisibility, when does that become a problem? Or is it a problem? Have a think about that over the next 2 days. Have a chat to your neighbour about that one as well. In terms of connectivity, that's very closely related, and particularly around the data connectivity, because we know that the true value of data is the number of times that that's connected with other data as well. And probably one of the forerunners is around open banking, and finance in the payment sector is really that forerunner of those open data. And we see where the likes of Australia, they might start with finance, but then they'll be moving into insurance, utilities, etc. in terms of that liberation of customer data as we go through. So APIs have absolutely exploded over recent times, and that will continue to be the case. And internationally, certainly fintechs have been leveraging those APIs and coming up with different solutions, different propositions for customers and so on. But that connectivity growth in areas such as things like wearables, that's starting to actually get a bit of traction now. I always thought it was a bit of a laugh, really, some of these wearable things like, Ring Pay and Tie Pay and Shirt Pay and all this other stuff. But it is actually starting to take traction, and some of them are actually quite cool propositions as well. So certainly from our point of view in terms of that connectivity, it's also looking across the region. And for New Zealand, I think we can't lose sight of the Asia Pacific region and sort of what role that we play in certainly making that connectivity work for them as well. Some discussions have kicked off recently about this digital divide, and some think, is that about infrastructure? Or is it about just education of people not knowing how to use particular devices and so on? Or is it simply an outcome of that growing social and financial gap that we find ourselves in at the moment? So ponder on that at the moment about that divide and what we can do to actually help fix that and change that as well. Speeding up. We know that the infrastructure rebuilds have going on worldwide, and they will still continue to do that with sort of the real time, some commentators talking about that as just simply a hygiene factor for payment systems. And a lot of the real time stuff, although it's been regulatory driven to date, we're now seeing more evidence of that being market driven. So consumers are really wanting to see that experience and see that happening. So if we look at the questions that we're asking ourselves in NZ, it's more about how fast is fast enough? And thanks to Russell Bryant, we've termed the phrase fast as, trademarked, of course, Russell, which is good, thank you. And we're just sort of tossing up that retrofit versus new build. And the approach that we're really looking at is how do we deliver a customer experience that is real time without the need to rebuild our whole infrastructure. And I believe that that is the right approach for us to take, and it's certainly the Kiwi approach for us to take as well. And if you look at that, their payments are working pretty good. May 2018, half of the value of and volume of the payments went through it just after 2:30 in the afternoon. So things are speeding up, and they continue to speed up, and they continue to, and they will do into the future as well. Security, boy. Maintaining confidence certainly in the payment system is a non-negotiable, absolutely. But the environment is changing, and the whole set of risks is changing as well. Certainly the 2017 and the WannaCry ransomware, that sort of was a very sobering reminder of how quickly that contagion effect can take effect. And for those that were affected, the WannaCry, they probably wanted to call it "wanna bawl my eyes out" because it was really hard on them. And so that's something that we need to take consideration of. So as an industry though, we're getting pulled in different directions. On one side they're saying open up, this is great, let third parties access data, but on the other side they're saying make it more secure, and probably Europe's a really good example with PSD2 on one hand, open, and then the GDPR in terms of that customer data, close that down on the other side. So very challenging times in terms of getting that proposition and that mix right from our point of view. But of course, as the bad guys get smarter, it's important to actually say what can we do to make sure that we maintain a safe and secure system. And part of the core of that is digital ID. And I think that's fast becoming a national imperative in terms of getting that digital ID sorted out for NZ Inc. To play that key role in terms of the safety and security. And for those that don't know, that's Parker trying to crack the Bank of England safe. He did it in 10 seconds. Awesome effort, I reckon, by Parker. Well done. Let's have a look at privacy. Look at old baby face there. Hey, wouldn't you trust that guy? He's just gorgeous. But I think one good thing that's came out of the Cambridge Analytica is that it's actually sparked a debate again about security, about my information, what I want to do with it, and what I'm going to allow others to do with it as well. So I think the advantage that we've got is that we've got great trust from the market, great trust with consumers. And that famous saying that trust arrives on foot and gallops off on a horse is really key. And so I think if we can maintain that trust, where there's no reason why we can't, then we're in a really good shape to make the most of that and to work with the data and activities that we've got. And the final factor that I wanted to cover off is around regulatory involvement and what that may look like. Certainly regulation's heating up a bit. Right, and the dial's been going up, but if we look globally, it's slightly more nuanced. If we look at the likes of Europe, it tends to be growing. USA tends to be actually stabilising a wee bit. And then if we look at Australia, I don't know, the regulator over there must wake up in the morning and say, I want to kick someone today, because that really seems to be quite invasive, quite aggressive from that point of view. So it's a bit over the place, but at the end of the day, they're still wanting the same outcomes, which is around improved resilience, reduce the risk, and respond to a lot of those security threats that are happening across the system as well. So from our point of view, I think what's important is that we get the right inputs so as we can have the right outcomes and it's right sized for the New Zealand market and for the New Zealand industry as well. So from our point of view, that's shaping our future. That regulatory landscape plays a very important role at that. And in terms of that, I think at the moment we're working very closely with government and the regulators, and that working relationship is really positive, and long may that last. So thanks, guys. Enjoy it. Love your work. Love your work. So that's those key factors that are shaping the payments, but what do Kiwis think about payments in NZ? Now, I can assure you that was not brought to you by Amex, MasterCard and Visa. They were real comments from real Kiwis in Auckland, miles away from their offices, okay? So, no, that's interesting to see what Kiwis thought, and particularly that rise of contactless and sector that comes through. We also recently undertook a bit of research with Ipsos in terms of perceptions of why Kiwis choose particular payment methods. And just a couple of those that we want to talk to there. Certainly contactless, there's a bit of prestige coming through there. I thought that was an interesting term. And also the online and traditional, just sort of keeping track of where we're going. So that's, in terms of that, there are some changes since the last research that we did. And the other ones that came through was around the credit and store card. Gotta love reward points, and we knew that was the case from that point of view. And then also the traditional non-credit, cheap and cherry, is sort of what they thought from that perspective. So slight shift, certainly a slight shift to convenience, and also a bit of a shift and a heightened around of that budgeting and that financial management as well. So let's talk about what we're up to. I think before we start there, I think what's really important in terms of the innovation part, particularly within the New Zealand market, is having that strong core. And with that core system, then we can start to innovate off the back of that. I mean, that's really important to get the rails right, and then we can do all the cool stuff over the top, make that really dynamic and do some really cool innovative pieces that go there. But it's not just domestic, it's also globally. That whole global interoperability is becoming more and more important. And you'll hear a bit about that from Swift and their GPI initiative that's coming up as one of the speakers over the next couple of days. And so as an export nation, you know, we rely on exports. We rely on those connectivity with offshore countries. So we need to be taking a more global perspective and not just think about the core and how it services our own market. So being relevant locally will only take us to a certain point. So looking at that and looking at how we're shaping our future, not having much joy with this clicker today, but that's okay. Looking at how we're shaping our future, I just think let's actually look at where we're starting from. Now, it's fair to say that we continue to have a really world-leading payment system. So often you hear, or I do hear from time to time, that, boy, we haven't innovated since FPOS. Just go and make a payment in the US. Now come back and then just see how bad you think it is. I mean, we are still very, very solid. And with that solid core, I think we can do great things in terms of that innovation. And particularly programs like Payments Direction will be leveraged well off that strong core and that strong base as well. So on the work of Payments Direction, we have got 6 work streams going across the industry at the moment, and the industry is putting a huge amount of resource and effort into that. I'll focus a bit about more so on the API framework work, but just want to touch on the other work streams as well, so everyone's up to speed with what we're doing. SBI 365, so that's moving to settling 365 days of the year. Now, at the end of each of these, you can go, woohoo, if you get really excited about any of these initiatives. If you don't, then we'll probably close them down and we'll move on to the next one. Okay, proxy identifiers, that's using your mobile number or your pet's name for a bank account. Oh, loving that. Okay, we'll keep that one going. We'll keep that one going. Speeding up the system, getting that faster. No, that's boring. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Request to pay. That's that push payment, peer-to-peer. Anyone excited about that one? Yes, that's great. And payment information, getting more information through with our payments as well. Okay, ISO 20022 puts most people to sleep. Fair enough. I'm with you on that one. But let's talk about shared API frameworks. Nice. So at least we've got our focus in the right place, which is really cool. So with that shared API frameworks, I mean, that was really about creating that dynamic network. It's about simplification and that consistency of delivery to the consumer and to the market, increased speed to the market as well, and also that greater partnering, and that's easier in terms of that partnering and also the service enhancement as well. So where are we at with that particular work stream? Full steam ahead in terms of our live pilot. We are working with the live pilot with 6 parties that are involved, ASB, Westpac and BNZ, working very closely with TradeMe, Datacom and Paymark, and they're all represented in the room. So if you want to know more about them, one of those people down and talk to one of the Payments NZ team to get an update on where we are at. So at the moment, we're about at point number 2 on the top line, which is that bilateral build between those 6 parties, and we're going gangbusters in terms of the framework development around standards. So things like access criteria, security and privacy, liability, all those gnarly bits. It's actually, that's the hard stuff. And so the teams are working through that to sort of get a framework in place, have the pilot all finished, and that's all done before the end of the year. Fantastic. That's pretty aggressive when you compare and you look at other jurisdictions that are just taking years and they come up with something really boring. So I think we're doing really well, very challenging for the industry, but I think we'll look back and we'll sort of say, gee, I didn't think it was actually going to be as transformational as it was. And someone very unkindly said, gee, that picture looks like you and Charles Duke in about 20 years' time. And I thought, bugger me, that's just unfair and unreasonable. Anyway, Charles is much more good looking than that. Let's just talk a little bit about open banking. I mean, it's all the same, but it's a little bit different. Open banking, and certainly across the jurisdictions, everyone's got different motivations for starting that. One around innovation, competition, customer data rights, inclusion. And we'll hear a bit about open banking over the next 2 days as well. But according to ACI Worldwide, plug for one of our sponsors, 44% of fintechs and 46% of banks believe that fintech opportunities lie in open APIs. So there are real opportunities emerging there, and from that point of view, I think that's really a big tick for us in terms of that we are heading in the right direction. On the other front, in terms of things that are looking likely over the next 12 months, open banking will continue to grow. We'll get a bit more regulatory clarity. Artificial intelligence will work. And certainly the Kool-Aid around blockchain, crypto and ICO will still remain, they'll still have the hype from that point of view. New real-time infrastructures will continue to be rolled out, and there's quite a number in the process over the next 2 years or so. And also from that disruptive piece, that shifting of value from one business model to another will continue. But in terms of that fintech and incumbents, I think actually they're more alike than you think. They're both wanting the same thing, which is that creating disruption or moving that value from one business model to another. But we tend to focus far too much on the differences. And those differences tend to stem from the fact that each party's got more to lose than the other party. So I think if we focus on what's similar in terms of the motivations of those two groups, that whole partnering piece will work a hell of a lot smoother and we'll make a lot more progress from that point of view. So just in terms of getting close to finishing, and then I'll hand it over to the professionals, I just wanted to talk a bit about our ecosystem and how that is growing in terms of that and how it's becoming more complex as well. We've now got 12 participants and 33 members, and it continues to grow, and that is happening through just the partnering as well. Fintechs, I think we've better understanding of them, and they're slightly tamed through that whole partnering piece, and also disruption, that's better understood as well. But I still think there's some of the big threats that we may not be taking seriously enough. If we look at the biggest known threat to payments and finance, they really are with an open sort of banking environment. It's the big guys, it's the Googles, the Apples, Facebook, and Amazon, and also Alibaba in this neck of the woods. So what are we doing in terms of that? It's a question of not so much when, not if, but it's more about when they will be there. They've already opened up in Australia in terms of Amazon. And just if you look at that, what do we need to do? What we really need to do is focus on the right outcomes for the consumer and just sort of make sure that we are in a good position to fight what is going to be a pretty aggressive fight as well. So if we look at from the man himself from Amazon, what he says is you can't rest on your laurels, you must continue to innovate. And I think that's a really useful thing to consider. Focus on the consumer. It's not when, it's not if. How do we batten down the hatches and make sure that we can stay relevant and survive from that perspective? So let's end on a little bedtime story. So the third little pig wanted to build a wolf-proof brick house. But the other two pigs thought that would take away resources from their budgets, so they talked him out of it right before the wolf ate them all. Anyway, think about that one.